Christopher Nolan calls these films masterpieces, but odds are you haven't even heard of half of them. Number one on this list, according to Nolan, is one of the great American movies nobody saw, while number 25 was so powerful, Nolan himself made sure it was re-released in theaters. Nolan's never been shy about the directors who've shaped his work, and he said he doesn't believe in hiding his influences. What you love becomes part of what you create. One major influence on Interstellar was Philip Kaufman's The Right Stuff. This historical drama follows the real-life story of 7 military test pilots chosen for America's first human spaceflight team. For Nolan, The Right Stuff is a near-perfect film that's criminally underappreciated, maybe because it's nearly 4 hours long. Before filming Interstellar, Nolan gathered his team to watch The Right Stuff, using it as a masterclass in space travel on film. The crew even paid close attention to Kaufman's editing and visual effects, looking to bring some of that same authenticity and scale to Interstellar. Nolan's such a huge fan of Saving Private Ryan that he actually went straight to Spielberg for advice before tackling Dunkirk. He said that Spielberg's opening scenes in Ryan are so powerful and intense that he knew he couldn't, and didn't want to, compete with them. Instead, he wanted to bring a different kind of tension to Dunkirk. Spielberg, knowing Nolan's a creative powerhouse, basically told him to let the history speak for itself, like he did on Ryan, and to put all that research front and center. Oppenheimer went head-to-head with Past Lives at the Oscars, but Nolan didn't seem too fazed by the competition. In fact, he called Celine Song's heart-wrenching romance tremendous and said it's one of his favorite films in recent years. The story centers on Nora and Hae Sung, childhood friends separated when Nora's family emigrates from South Korea. 2 decades later, they reconnect for a week that forces them to confront love, destiny, and the paths they didn't take. Interestingly, Past Lives is only the second film directed by an Asian woman to be nominated for Best Picture, following Nomadland. Orson Welles' Mr. Arkadin often slips under the radar compared to his better-known works, but Nolan has a deep appreciation for how it captures heartbreaking glimpses of Welles' genius. Welles directs, writes, and stars in this noir tale of an elusive billionaire hiring an American smuggler to dig into his past, a mystery that spirals into a Cold War European landscape. Sure, it's considered flawed, especially given its shoestring budget, but Welles fans love his inventive use of camera angles here. Initially released as Masquerade, the title switched to Mr. Arkadin when it finally landed in the US in 1962, following a rocky distribution path as an independent film. Nolan's admiration for stop-motion animators Stephen and Timothy Quay runs so deep, he even brought 3 of their films on tour in 2015. Their 1986 short Street of Crocodiles is a standout for him. Nolan has said, "As soon as you see an image from that film, you can't take your eyes away." The short follows a puppet, newly freed from its strings, exploring a dusty, surreal marketplace, eventually lured into a miniature tailor shop by doll-like figures. It's also one of the few short films ever to compete for the Palme d'Or at Cannes, a testament to its visual pull and eerie atmosphere. The Comb is another Quay Brothers short that Nolan included in his 2015 curated film tour. Known for their dark, surreal imagery, the Quay Brothers create a dreamlike journey through a woman's imagination, seen from the perspective of a porcelain doll. This 18-minute film taps right into your subconscious and pulls you into a hauntingly still world. Some consider it the brothers' second-best work after Street of Crocodiles, but if you're a fan of avant-garde stop-motion, The Comb is essential viewing. Charlotte Wells' Aftersun, one of the most celebrated debut films of 2022, follows a young father, played by Paul Mescal, on a Turkish holiday with his daughter Sophie, Frankie Corio. Nolan praised it for its intimacy and power on the big screen. As he told The Telegraph, "Why would you have to see something like Aftersun on the big screen? But of course you have to." Behind the scenes, it was a massive undertaking. Wells auditioned over 800 girls before landing on newcomer Frankie Corio. Aftersun has already racked up a staggering 95 wins and 181 nominations. In crafting Dunkirk, Nolan drew inspiration from 2 thrillers known for their relentless pacing, Jan de Bont's Speed, and Tony Scott's Unstoppable. He considers Unstoppable, starring Denzel Washington and Chris Pine, a masterclass in suspense and momentum, calling it a prime example of using pacing to heighten tension. As for Speed, Nolan praised it as a ticking clock nail-biter of the highest order, a true nail-biter that builds its suspense with precision. Nolan has a soft spot for 12 Angry Men. And honestly, who wouldn't? Sidney Lumet's classic dives deep into the dynamics between men in a way few films do. It's a powerful courtroom drama where Henry Fonda and Lee J. Cobb play members of an all-male jury debating the fate of a teenager accused of murder. Despite its brilliance, the film bombed financially, leaving Fonda unpaid for his deferred salary. Still, he considered it one of his top 3 films. The film got 3 Oscar nods, yet no wins, with The Bridge on the River Kwai sweeping the awards instead. Fonda blamed United Artists' strategy, claiming they marketed it in oversized theaters and failed to re-release it after its critical success. Nicholas Roeg's bad timing is another pick that highlights Nolan's admiration for unconventional storytelling. This psychological thriller, starring Art Garfunkel and Teresa Russell, follows a messy, turbulent relationship that's anything but ordinary. Roeg's unique approach to structure and visual style made a mark on Nolan, who praised Roeg's films for their structural and photographic innovation. But not everyone was a fan. The Rank organization was so horrified that one executive called it a sick film made by sick people for sick people, even removing their logo from UK release prints. Here's one that's truly out there. Godfrey Reggio's experimental documentary has no dialogue, no plot, just images and music, exploring the effects of human progress. For Nolan, it's a masterpiece, describing it as art, not propaganda. It's all about prompting thought without telling you what to think. But don't let the lack of dialogue fool you. This was a massive project, taking 6 years to film and over 3 years to score. David Lean's Ryan's Daughter is one of those films that's all about visual impact. Nolan calls it pure cinema, captivated by the wind-swept beaches, crashing waves, and how the landscape feeds the narrative. Set after the 1916 Easter Rising, it tells the story of a married woman's affair with a British officer in a small Irish village. Though the movie eventually turned a profit, it didn't meet MGM's high hopes, and Lean took the criticism so hard, he didn't direct again for 14 years. Like many filmmakers of his generation, Star Wars was a game-changer for Nolan. He saw George Lucas's galaxy far, far away when he was just 7, and it left a massive impression on him. Suddenly, movies could be about entirely new worlds and experiences, an idea that fueled his early experiments with his dad's Super 8 camera. After Star Wars, Nolan's homemade films all became space adventures. It's safe to say Lucas's groundbreaking vision helped inspire Nolan's own world building later on. Nolan's Batman trilogy owes a lot to Richard Donner's Superman. This 1978 classic wasn't just a superhero movie, it was an origin story grounded in a world that felt real, a metropolis that looked and breathed like New York. Nolan loved how Donner created a city that felt familiar, then added an extraordinary figure soaring through it. Inspired by this approach, Nolan pitched Warner Brothers on a Batman film with the same real-world feel, which led to the iconic Dark Knight series. Fritz Lang is another favorite of Nolan's. The director says the German filmmaking icon is at his most wicked and entertaining in the 1933 crime movie, The Testament of Dr. Mabuse. Nolan mentioned the film is essential research for anyone attempting to write a supervillain. Nolan has called Terrence Malick's World War II drama an extraordinary vision of war. The sprawling ensemble drama earned 7 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture and Best Director. Thin Red Line would be used as a source of inspiration for Nolan during the development of Dunkirk. Nolan's film also picked up Best Picture and Best Director Oscar noms, among others. If you're into stylish heists, this one is a must-see. This Technicolor caper centers on a gang of thieves planning to swipe a jeweled dagger from an Istanbul museum. Nolan himself admits he's not sure what the critics think, but he's all in for the entertainment value. He praises the film's iconic dangling from the ceiling heist scene, the very one that inspired Mission Impossible. And of course, Peter Ustinov's performance. Nolan calls it incredible. This one's style over substance in the best way possible. Nolan has a soft spot for Terrence Malick, and it's no surprise. He's called Malick's work immediately recognizable, admiring how Malick's films connect so seamlessly, yet the techniques behind them remain elusive. The Tree of Life is a prime example. Dissatisfied with modern CGI, Malick went back to basics, recruiting Douglas Trumbull to create stunning visuals with practical effects. If you don't know the guy, he's the effects genius behind A Space Odyssey and Blade Runner. The story follows a family in 1950s Texas, with a star-studded cast featuring Jessica Chastain, Brad Pitt, and Sean Penn. It's haunting, beautiful, and right up Nolan's alley. Nolan's love affair with A Space Odyssey began when he saw it as a kid. At just 7, he didn't fully get it, but that didn't matter. He was swept away by Stanley Kubrick's epic, saying it was a pure cinema experience, a world you didn't question for a second. Watching A Space Odyssey after growing up with Star Wars was mind-blowing, and Nolan still remembers the way he and his friends would debate what it all meant. Kubrick's work had a profound impact on him, setting the stage for the mind-bending sci-fi he'd one day make. Nolan's always been open about how much he's borrowed from Bond movies over the years. Surprisingly, his favorite Bond film isn't one of the big, explosive ones with Connery or Moore, but On Her Majesty's Secret Service, the one where George Lazenby briefly took over as Bond. Nolan's talked about how this film shaped Inception, admiring how it blends intense action with romance, tragedy, and emotion. For him, it's the most heartfelt Bond film, with a love story that influenced the deeper layers of Inception. Seems like he's got a real soft spot for Bond with a bit more heart. It's a hell of a movie. It holds up very well, Nolan said. It's no secret that Nolan's a massive James Bond fan. In fact, a lot of the globe-trotting in Batman Begins was inspired by Bond films. He often talks about how The Spy Who Loved Me set the bar for scope and scale, especially that iconic Lotus that turned into a submarine. As Nolan puts it, you believe it, and it works. Ian Fleming wasn't thrilled with the original Spy Who Loved Me novel and didn't allow it to be printed in paperback during his lifetime. It wasn't until after his death that the book became widely available. And as for the film's production, they went big. $1 million out of a $13.5 million budget went toward building the largest soundstage in the world for Stromberg's supertanker set. If you're a fan of Interstellar, consider For All Mankind required viewing. This documentary weaves real footage from NASA's Apollo missions into a seamless narrative, creating a powerful look at humanity's journey to the moon. Nolan calls it an incredible document of man's greatest endeavor. It's easy to see why he'd connect with this film. The beauty, the isolation, the awe of space. It's like Interstellar, but with real-life stakes. Quentin Tarantino's The Hateful Eight might be divisive, but Nolan loved it enough to host a 70mm screening for the Directors Guild of America, followed by a Q&A with Tarantino himself. Nolan praised the film's incredible formalism, admiring the precision in each camera shot and the way Tarantino brought back the thrill of watching a movie in a theater. It's classic Tarantino. Violence, humor, and tension, all wrapped up in a blizzard-bound cabin in post-Civil War Wyoming. Nolan's admiration for The Hateful Eight is clear. He respects its craft and the way it embraces the theatrical experience. The Hit is exactly the kind of film Nolan gravitates toward, with its focus on desperate men and the tension between them. Directed by Stephen Frears, this British crime movie follows two hitmen transporting a criminal to Paris for execution. It also features Tim Roth in a strong early role and marks a powerful return for Terence Stamp. Nolan considers The Hit a hidden gem, once naming it his top movie in a piece for the Criterion Collection. He said it's rare to see a film that's willing to take such a risk by zeroing in on human tension alone. Fritz Lang's Metropolis isn't just one of the first great sci-fi films. It's a cornerstone of cinema history. Nolan refers to it as a key touchstone for its groundbreaking special effects and expressionist style, which still ripple through modern movies. Its influence on Nolan himself is clear. Just look at the towering dystopian cityscapes in Inception or The Dark Knight's moody, industrial Gotham. Metropolis laid the groundwork for the genre-bending visual effects that Nolan would master decades later. Nolan was so captivated by David Bowie's performance here that he later cast him in The Prestige. The Nagisa Oshima film takes place in a Japanese prisoners of war camp during World War II, with Bowie front and center in a role that's haunting and deeply moving. It's one of the rare films that truly captures Bowie's unique charisma, and Nolan's called it tailor-made for his talents. Bowie once shared how Oshima handled direction. He meticulously guided the Japanese actors but told the British cast to do whatever it is you people do. The result is an unforgettable, atmospheric piece that digs into the human spirit, making it a war film that avoids the typical drama. In a rare moment of promoting someone else's work, Nolan praised Godzilla Minus One in a 2023 interview with director Takashi Yamazaki. Set in the post-World War II era, this Japanese film brings a deeper emotional core to the typical kaiju chaos. Nolan called it a tremendous film, particularly applauding its stunning mechanics and underlying depth. The movie grossed $116 million worldwide on a $15 million budget, becoming the most successful Japanese Godzilla film. It's not every day you see Nolan hyping a monster movie, but when he does, you know it's worth a watch. Nolan isn't known for making his film audiences laugh, but that doesn't mean he doesn't have a good sense of humor. While out promoting Oppenheimer in 2023, Nolan said that the 2006 NASCAR parody starring Will Ferrell as the title character was a remote drop. I'm never going to be able to switch that up. With a box office of $163 million, this is one of the highest-grossing movies of Will Ferrell's entire career. Turns out even Christopher Nolan has his guilty pleasures, and The Hitcher is one of them. This 1986 horror thriller follows a hitchhiking killer, played by Rutger Hauer, who terrorizes a young driver, C. Thomas Howell, across Texas, framing him for his crimes along the way. Nolan calls the movie a nostalgic thrill from his teenage years, saying he never questioned the film's mind-bendingly random logic back then, but he still praises Hauer's chilling performance as one of his best, up there with his iconic turn in Blade Runner. Ridley Scott's Alien was nothing short of a revelation for Nolan. Both Alien and Blade Runner left him in awe with their world-building, transporting him to entirely different realms. For Nolan, Scott was the kind of director who took audiences to new worlds, an approach Nolan has since made his own. As a teenager, Nolan realized the director was the controlling force of a film, much like he was on his Super 8 camera. It was Alien and Blade Runner that sparked this revelation. Nolan's Hitchcock obsession is well known, and while he's drawn inspiration from several Hitchcock films, Foreign Correspondent holds a special place. The film's legendary plane crash scene, a groundbreaking feat for its time, was a direct inspiration for the aerial scenes in Dunkirk. Hitchcock's suspenseful style was unmatched, and Nolan credits Foreign Correspondent as a masterclass in visual storytelling. Filming wrapped just before the Blitz began, with Hitchcock even adding a last-minute scene set in a London radio station. It was filmed on July 5th, and the real-life bombing started on July 10, 1940. Foreign Correspondent was Hitchcock at his suspenseful best, and it's clear how much Nolan has learned from him. Nolan sat down with Edgar Wright on the Director's Cut podcast and couldn't stop praising Baby Driver. The 2017 action heist film follows Baby, a skilled driver forced by a crime boss to be his getaway driver. Nolan called it a phenomenal piece of work, especially loving how Wright handled the action scenes. From the intense foot chases to the perfectly timed car chases, he said it felt like Wright genuinely loved crafting every second of it. Despite 3 Oscar nominations, Baby Driver didn't win any, and some still see that as a serious snub. Few films scream epic, louder than Lawrence of Arabia. And for Nolan, it's more than just a cinematic masterpiece. It's a testament to why shooting on film matters. Nolan has been fighting for the preservation of celluloid in a world going digital, and he's often pointed to David Lean's epic as proof of the magic you get from film. During the 2015 London Film Festival, Nolan used Lawrence of Arabia to show off the subtle shadow details and breathtaking skies that just don't pop the same way on Blu-ray. At the Academy's 20th anniversary screening of Heat in 2016, Nolan admitted he was initially skeptical about all the hype surrounding Michael Mann's crime thriller, but after seeing it, he realized it was more than just a cops and robbers flick. Nolan has drawn direct inspiration from Heat in his own work, most notably in The Dark Knight, where he borrowed Mann's grounded, intense style of action. Nolan has a deep respect for Hugh Hudson's Chariots of Fire, calling it a masterpiece of British filmmaking. The film tells the story of two British athletes competing in the 1924 Olympics, balancing their personal beliefs and ambitions. Chariots of Fire is known for its iconic soundtrack, lush visuals, and subtle exploration of faith and pride. For Nolan, it's a masterclass in pushing boundaries within classic British storytelling. Nolan calls All Quiet on the Western Front the ultimate anti-war film. Unlike most Hollywood war movies, this one doesn't glamorize the battlefield. It's brutal, raw, and unflinchingly honest. Made at a time when censorship was lax, the film shows the true horrors of war in a way that still feels relevant. One chilling scene was inspired by an actual German soldier who witnessed a fellow soldier's hands gripping barbed wire even after an artillery blast. Nolan has credited All Quiet on the Western Front with shaping his own approach to war on screen, particularly in Dunkirk, where survival alone is the victory. Nolan has called the Battle of Algiers one of the most immersive films he's ever seen. It's shot in a documentary style, pulling you right into the streets during the Algerian War. Nolan admired how the creators made you care about the characters without resorting to melodrama. This is the film that taught Nolan the power of verite storytelling, and its influence can be seen in how he crafted Dunkirk, where you feel the tension and stakes through sheer immersion. Steven Spielberg was actually the original pick to direct Interstellar, with a script written by Nolan's brother Jonathan, but plans shifted and Chris Nolan ended up taking over and tweaking the story. Still, Close Encounters left a big mark on Interstellar. Spielberg's film follows an ordinary guy from Indiana whose life is completely shaken after a UFO encounter. That influence is all over Interstellar, where Nolan wanted to capture the same awe and human connection you feel in Close Encounters, just on a whole new scale. First Man isn't your typical space biopic. Damien Chazelle, 3 films in, took on Neil Armstrong's iconic moon landing with a whole new approach. Intense, detailed, and deeply personal. Nolan's a big fan of Chazelle's work, and in Variety's Directors on Directors series, he called Chazelle one of the most exciting filmmakers around. For First Man, Nolan was impressed by how Chazelle didn't just play it safe, but gave us a gritty, realistic take on the space program, full of detail and tension. He pointed out that while nobody knows exactly what Armstrong thought standing on the moon, Chazelle's take feels close, personal, and real. To Nolan, making an introverted movie about such a huge moment in history was a bold choice, and one that'll probably only get more meaningful with time.